My name's Nadia.
Hi, Nadia.
I just wanted to ask you, because you were talking about how you found started to find out about your grandfather. What was your views after your family told you about your grandfather?
Well, it was interesting. I didn't know anything about my grandfather until I went to a prep school, boarding school. So, and this was a very, very savage boarding school. It was later closed down for savage brutality. But at that school, I remember I was being bullied by some kids were trying to sort of beat me up, and and being very rude about my grandfather. So, and I can't remember how it worked out, but I mean I think there was a nice kitchen staff lady or something who I'd maybe sent them packing, and I said, "Oh, what is this about my grandfather? I didn't know I had a baddie grandfather." And so she said, "Oh, he's just a politician. All politicians are bad." She said. So I sort of thought, well, that's an interesting idea. I mean, I must have been 8, 9 at the time, I guess, 9 years old. So it lodged in my brain anyway, because I can remember it to this day. So I must have thought, right, okay, I better investigate this a little bit further. So of course, I mean, probably over the years I was picking up more stuff, and then later, I guess, when maybe a few years, I mean, over the years, more I began to know more and more and more, and then I suppose I did start sort of thinking that that it was a very odd family to be born into, and that and my father was noticeably very, very disturbed himself. He'd fought in the Second World War against Nazis, so in one way, he was sort of an accredited anti-fascist because he had medal and he'd done, these 4 or 5 years in the army fighting against the Nazis. And but but he was very, very troubled. He was very, very troubled because he was much closer to the whole thing. And so, but on the other hand, I was getting on with being a teenager and making friends and forming my own opinions, and as I was saying, I love loving pop music and Bob Marley, and so I mean I never ever had a kind of I never ever took seriously any of the theories that that kind of some races were baddies. I just thought that was insane, I mean, and then of course I was also getting old in an environment where the British Empire was coming under a lot of flack. So was I to believe that my own, English kind of white things were a pile of shit, put it bluntly. So I mean, I didn't really know, but I mean, I didn't want to take that on any more than I wanted to take on that any other races were inherently bad. And my own experience was that everybody was, we're all muddled up, we're all a mix, we're all kind of good and bad and this and that and the other. So I wasn't really having anything to do with the sort of Oswald Mosley kind of bullshit. So, but I did sort of feel peculiarly kind of lumped with being the name Mosley and people making assumptions about me. I would come across people who assumed that I was sort of genetically evil and probably a sort of fascist or something. And what was I to do with that? I mean, just sort of not be one, really. I guess was my response to that. Yeah.
Did you hear about the Battle of Lewisham?
Well, no, I think at the time, just remind me of the date. No?
It was in 1977.
77, that's right. So in 1977, I think I was just moving to the. Maybe I was just getting married. 70. No, what was I doing in 77? No, I think I was working very, very hard as a potter, ceramicist in London. And was a bit of London, and there were riots. There were lots of riots all over the place at the time, and you'd sort of hear about them. And I mean, I was always on the kind of right side, so to speak, because I didn't have any sympathy with the police. I mean, I remember once, actually, it must have been no, it was a bit earlier, actually. I was right in the middle of the Notting Hill riots. I had some friends who lived on All Saints Road, which was the epicenter of the big Notting Hill riot, which I do remember about, because I was actually there. And we were all sitting with our legs dangling out the window, on this house on All Saints Road. And the looters and the rioters came up and down the road and smashing the shop windows and everything. Several things, three things I remember very clearly about that. One was that the police in their buses were making sort of National Front signs on the bus window, which was horrible. Yeah, yeah, exactly that kind of thing. Yeah, which was extremely unpleasant. Second thing I remember is that there's some rioters going up. They smashed the windows of an off license, and a guy came out. A rioter came out holding a bottle of vodka rum or something. At any rate, and he saw us with our bunch of kind of white kids, with their legs dangling out the window, and he threw this bottle up, and me, not being used to the kind of, basically good relations in All Saints Road between black and white. I thought he was strange, I wasn't like that. And this friend of mine, sitting next to me, also a white guy, sitting next to me, said, "Don't be a fool," and caught the bottle and said, "Thanks, mate." So I felt a bit naive then. And then the third thing I remember, which was really, really interesting, I thought, was that in the doorways, of some of the houses, and I watched this happen, was some sort of white, sort of Trotskyite types, sort of all communists. I don't know if they're Trotskyites. They were sort of communist but they were called agitators or agitprop people. I don't know what the right. I used to know the right word, but I can't remember it. And they were shouting in black voices, things like, "Off the pigs," or something like that, saying, you're trying to provoke. Because if you were communist in those days, you wanted to provoke mass violence in order to effect the kind of revolution that was always just around the corner for those guys, you see. So, that was the third thing that I remember from the Notting Hill riots. But it was basically an interesting experience. But it was great to be right in the thick of it, and see all this stuff going on from our first floor window with our legs dangling out, and a nice bottle of something to make us all enjoy it a bit more.
So, did you ever try being an activist at any point of your life?
Yeah. Actually, the other day, a couple of years ago, I joined a group called Disobey, which was led by a very nice lady in Brixton, and I joined up, and about 2 weeks later, I phoned her. I got in touch with her and said, "It's really weird. Both my computers have completely been gone to don't work anymore." And she said, "That's happened to all of us." And this organisation was set up to monitor acts of injustice perpetrated by people in positions of power, so that if they were doing something wrong, people employed by them could make a log of what they objected to. So it wasn't violent revolution or anything. Any rate, but she's now become I think she's become a sort of pop singer, and I don't know if she would even like me mentioning her name, because maybe she's disowned her past. I don't know, but anyway, yeah. So that's, and then I'm a member of a couple of groups agitating for reform and monetary reform and that kind of thing, and I don't think I'm a member of any other group at the moment, but I'm all for something happening to change things. I think it's absolutely desperate the way we are today. It's sort of insane, It's really completely mad, and there are so few activists, and most activists are sort of my age or older, sort of thing. You know what I mean? I find myself with a sort of bunch of 80-year-olds all saying, "Ew." Don't know what's.
Well, there is still like the BLM, the Black Lives Matter, who today are doing stuff, and people do say that they're not doing enough. But what's your opinion?
I think that's really, really important, and obviously in America it's much more important, because I think in England, we are probably. I mean, I was having a conversation with Lorna, Glenn's wife, about this the other day, and she was saying, well, it's easy to think there's no racial discrimination, and I absolutely accept her point that there still is, but I think that we're in a complicated situation in England where the forms and methods of discrimination are much more unstated and subtle, and kind of they operate in a way that's much more difficult to tackle. For instance, the BBC. Well, the BBC is famous now because it's got this huge gender imbalance in pay. But actually, the BBC is sort of bizarrely all white kind of. I know they've got a few front people, who are not white, but I mean, it's an incredibly sort of. I mean, Lorna will talk about that 'cause she worked in the BBC, and I've got a nephew who's working in the BBC, and he just says it's incredible. The sort of the racist actuality, it's not there's a policy or anything. How do you fight? I don't know the answer to how we can move forward now. I mean, I think it's interesting. I only know. I mean, the only two things I do feel strongly opinionated about is getting a better democratic system, or improving the democratic system, and then also the monetary system. I think needs reforming, and I think those are both ways in which you can specify how things should move on quite easily and simply. But you'll never get them published.
Well, thanks for talking.
Well, pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for.
Okay.